kind of the basics. So I'm Mike McAvoy. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Cahoot, and wanted to welcome you guys to today's webinar. Before we get started, if you want to jump back a slide there. Oh, the other way. All right, and welcome to the webinar again today, how to overcome new FBA inventory limits and save your Q4 sales. It's a really hot topic. We got a big crowd today, so looking forward to sharing some really important information that I think people will get a lot of value out of coming up on the fourth quarter, which is really just right around the corner. And before we get into the main presentation, I just want to take care of some, some housekeeping information with the webinar. So we will be sending a copy of the webinar, a recording of that. That'll go out tomorrow. Of course, it's a webinar, so you won't need your camera or microphone. One of the things we really like to see in these webinars is we really want to see people engage and ask questions. We've got some really smart panelists on here today, so be sure to use the Q&A feature there at the bottom of the screen and keep questions coming really throughout the webinar. And we've got some people online here who will try to answer as many of those as we can in line, but then we'll also do some questions at the end that we'll do live, but be sure to keep those questions coming. We will have just one simple poll right at the very end. And as I mentioned, we will have a live Q&A at the end as well. So let's move on, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers today. First, we've got Manish Chowdhury. He's the founder and CEO of Cahoot, the world's first peer-to-peer e-commerce order fulfillment network. Cahoot enables e-commerce merchants to increase sales with affordable nationwide one-day and two-day delivery everywhere they sell. And this year, Cahoot was recognized as one of Fast Company's most innovative companies. Also here, we've got today Evan Durant. He's the general manager of dropship at Kaspien. Evan has over 8 years of experience managing and growing sales on Amazon and other marketplaces. As the GM of dropship, Evan continuously seeks to refine and improve business processes to provide as much value as possible to Kaspien's partners. And we also have Ned Woodward. He's the purchase order director at Kaspien. Ned helms Kaspien's purchase order management team, providing brands with logistical support to meet all their marketplace needs in an ever-changing environment. Ned draws on over 8 years of experience in supply chain and logistics in B&M and e-commerce, and over 6 years focused heavily on Amazon strategy. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you. Actually, one more thing, we'll cover the agenda. First thing that we'll talk about are changes to the FBA limits and what's been driving them. We'll take a look at those kind of over time and what's been changing. We'll also take a look at how these changes are impacting sellers and their Q4. We'll talk about what sellers can do to maximize their limits and really help their IPI score. And then we'll also look at alternative fulfillment models that you can use to sort of work around the new FBA limits. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll do a live Q&A. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Mike. Once again, thank you everyone for joining. It is a very exciting topic, a very important one. So please stick around. The webinar is packed with actionable advice and content. So please keep those questions coming because we'd love to answer as many of them as possible. But we're going to get right into the topic, which is on the minds of many sellers right now, the FBA limits and Q4 and how to save the holiday season and so on. It's no surprise that Amazon made some massive changes to its storage limits just 3 months ago. In April of this year, Amazon announced another large change to the way how it allows sellers to replenish stock and how they calculate storage limits. One of the biggest change is Amazon went from ASIN level quantity limits in April to a new methodology what they call storage type limits. And storage type limits is essentially every item that you are sending to Amazon FBA is classified in one of these six categories: standard, oversized, footwear, apparel, flammable, and aerosol. And these are not the categories of listings that you sell your products in. It is basically determined by Amazon based on the characteristics of the item. And you cannot self-identify which category an item would fall under. And each of them have certain limits. And these limits are not interchangeable. If you had a lot of oversized capacity or in your account and you don't use that, you cannot exchange that for something else. So Amazon is very tightly managing these limits. And there are, of course, sellers around the world are mostly complaining that these limits are hurting them. You know, most sellers have seen a decline in their storage limits and restock limits. Some sellers have seen as much as 25%. Others have seen a reduction of as much as 65%. So, needless to say, there has been a decline across the board, and it was important to see a little bit peek inside behind the scenes as to what's happening. You know, this is while this change may surprise some of the sellers, but frankly, Amazon has been struggling with FBA capacity for many years now. I mean, starting from 2012, nearly 9 years ago, when Amazon introduced long-term storage, which kicked in right after 90 days, which came as a big surprise for a lot of sellers. And then gradually, they started applying additional storage limits. Then they introduced the IPI score, or the Inventory Performance Index, to minimize storage in FBA. Then they increased their long-term storage fees. And then last spring, when COVID hit, Amazon, of course, took a stance on essentials versus non-essential products. You could not even send your non-essentials into Amazon or FBA, and even the orders that were placed for non-essential items were being intentionally delayed. And then to deal with the demand crisis for FBA space, Amazon temporarily increased the IPI score to 500 from 450. And I know that they brought it back down recently, but then they went from ASIN level limits to storage type limits. So needless to say, you know, it would be very safe to say that FBA only wants your fast moving SKUs. They don't want to store inventory that is not going to move rapidly. And we've got some great examples further in the presentation. Just to, you know, understand from the bottom up, you know, what is causing this? You know, what's the fundamental reason why FBA has been introducing these new limits and trying to find a balance between how to please the sellers, but also manage its network capacity. You know, the fact is, e-commerce demand has doubled in the last year. You know, e-commerce was growing steadily at a double-digit pace, you know, 10, 12, 14, 15% per year, to suddenly last year, e-commerce grew almost 27%, almost double. And of course, Amazon, as a result of that, was a great choice for a number of sellers who came and joined Amazon as a marketplace seller. And to be precise, about 750,000 new sellers joined Amazon last year. It's a massive increase. And of course, in order to satisfy those sellers, Amazon has to make room, has to make space available, because majority of those sellers rely on FBA. So Amazon cannot take in containers worth of inventory because they just don't have space. And that's the reality. And it takes a long time for Amazon even to build new warehouses and fulfillment centers. I mean, these are multi-year projects that cannot be shrunk rapidly and quickly. So we predict that these delays and receiving delays and storage limits and IPI and any combination variation thereof is here to stay. It's most likely going to get worse before it gets better. So it would help the sellers to understand and recognize that reality, that there is a real problem. It's of a fundamental nature, and therefore you should plan around that and not just hope for things to change in a quick time frame. So we'll get into what are these big changes and the new limits and how to prepare for Q4. Yeah. So as we saw earlier, Amazon only wants your fast-moving SKUs, and it's because of the limited FBA space that they have. And smaller limits means more frequent and smaller inbounds, because Amazon is not encouraging sellers to send tons of inventory that is not going to move quickly. And therefore, the three big things that sellers need to recognize that there's not enough space, and there is a decline of overall limit, and especially if you're selling oversized SKUs. Those will continue to be monitored very closely. So if you're in the oversized bucket and category, you definitely want to plan around that. And IPI is at 450 right now, which is the Inventory Performance Index, which is Amazon's way of measuring how fast the inventory is turning. And they use that to determine your storage limits. And you can find out, by the way, for each of those categories, what limits you have, how much space is available by visiting your Amazon Seller Central account. And there's some actionable tips that we will discuss later in the presentation as to how to make the most of your current space, because that space is valuable and it would be very beneficial and in your best interest to take a proactive look and manage that proactively and efficiently. So I want to turn this over to Evan and Ned. I know that there's launching new products is going to be especially tricky in the current environment. So Evan, Ned, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Manish, and thank you, Mike. Thanks for having us today. It's a pleasure to be here. So as far as new product launches go, like the slide says, especially tricky right now with all the changes that Amazon's made. The most recent change to storage type limits can have a positive impact on your new SKUs with high velocity, but SKUs without high velocity will take up space that could be utilized for the existing fast movers. So throughout, we'll talk a little bit about this, but it's important to understand, your catalog and the different profiles of each SKU as they relate to your restock limits, so that you're moving SKUs in and out and having the most accretive inventory at FBA to support a strong IPI and just make sure that you have stable inventory limits throughout Q4. It's also important to understand how the inventory limits for each storage type relate to your catalog. So basically looking broadly across your catalog and just making sure you're planning in advance to land inventory based on your lead times, based on the shipment sizes. You could try to land containers and ship those in, but as soon as you create that shipment, it's going to impact against your utilization. Some of those larger shipments, especially if they're shipping from China, could take months. So those could really negatively impact your utilization, as opposed to landing containers at a 3PL that you've secured and that you trust, and then you can batch the inventory in. I would be curious to hear from Evan's perspective how he's thinking about this from a dropship perspective, though, as I know the planning is a little bit different as opposed to how we do things on the retail side of Kaspien. Evan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Ned. Really, the main thing here is to be as proactive as possible. When you're doing the dropship side of things, if you don't have your SKUs already created, create them now, create them early. Make sure that you're going through all of the steps, that there's no hurdles, so that you're not sitting with inventory at a 3PL, but no live Amazon listing. Dropship can absolutely work in tandem with the FBA side. So you should be able to float a container over, have some of that inventory available, have that listing live while inventory is going into FBA. What that'll do for you is that allows you to start gaining traction earlier rather than later. and so you get that boost to velocity as soon as possible.
Thank you, guys. And moving on, seasonal sellers. I mean, this is a lot of the folks here, perhaps in the audience, they rely on heavy Q4 sales, and the sales are not quite the same the first 3 quarters. What would you like to share with the seasonal sellers?
Yeah, to me, this slide is a bit of a callback to one of the first ones, just around some of the feedback that we saw on forums from different sellers and what the impact has been to their restock limits and their IPI throughout all the changes Amazon's been making. So moral of the story here is it's Amazon's world and sellers are just living in it. Those goalposts can be changing, on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So it's important to have a strategy that allows you to continue to execute on your sales goals, regardless of what Amazon is doing within the FBA network. So having a trusted 3PL or a provider that can ensure that you're executing on your holiday or seasonal sales targets is very important to remain agile through all the changes.
Thank you. And I know that planning now is going to be more critical than ever. You cannot just set it and forget it, because that can have quite a big impact on not just your current Q4 situation, but also coming out of Q4 for early next year. So if you want to touch on this, because this is a very insightful slide where, if left unmanaged, it can have a big drawback. And if you want to talk a little bit about this.
Yes, absolutely. What I think this slide indicates is that the restock limits are based on a lot of cyclical factors, and they're all intertwined. So it's important to understand each of these factors and how it impacts overall, because you'll need to pull different levers to ensure that your IPI and your restock limits can support those sales goals and your, those holiday targets. Because, and I mentioned this before, but because your inbound shipments impact utilization, just being aware of those longer lead times, understanding what products you can flow directly into FBA versus needing to use some alternative fulfillment method to avoid any negative repercussions to your restock limits, also very important. But yeah, that's how I see these pieces functioning and kind of how they play into the larger picture with IPI and those changing restock limits. So this one, a little bit about Q4 uncertainty. This is calling out some of the dates around last year's holidays and when you want to inbound your inventory. For us at Kaspien, we start planning, in spring. We're placing orders in the summer and just making sure that we're landing inventory, the sufficient inventory we need for holiday sales up until these holidays start. Quite a balancing act, especially because you have Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and then Christmas, and then you start all over with 2021 and some of the early season planning. So just it's important to be aware of those different cycles, when you can land inventory at FBA, when you need to land that at a 3PL and batch it in. But you want to watch how things shift, into Q4 for 2021 and early 2022, and plan early for the next year, all while kind of keeping track of the changes that Amazon is making based on the capacity in their network and the global supply chain. And this is just a little bit more around what we talked about on the last slide. I think the largest call out here is just having that alternative fulfillment method, having a solid provider, whether that's Cahoot or some other method that allows you to be very agile in your fulfillment methods. Understanding that there's different margin profiles associated with each one of those. There's different metrics associated with, on-time delivery and tracking and stuff like that. So lot to weigh there in that equation, but it's important to have those two things running in tandem. So as Amazon makes changes, you can be agile and pull those levers.
Thank you, Ned. One point that I'd like to add here is, this year we saw holiday season and holiday shopping happening earlier in the year, and I don't believe that it'll be any different. If anything, holiday shopping is going to be pulled up, and because of several reasons, carrier capacity constraints. I mean, UPS, FedEx, USPS, all of them are completely choked. They are having a lot of trouble moving packages in great volume across their networks. So they've been setting those deadlines, for ground shipping, for example, and they're happening earlier and earlier. And most free shipping on Amazon and other channels rely heavily on UPS ground, FedEx ground, or USPS. So be mindful of that, from a promotion, pricing, and perspective. You don't want to wait till the last minute and thinking when your competition is going to run out of stock and you will capture the sales in the last 2 days. If the carriers cannot deliver those orders or you cannot get it to your customers, those will show up as returns, which will be even more painful. So, you want to be very mindful. If you have a multi-channel sales strategy, you want to make sure that you're unloading your stock, running your promotions early. And these numbers are from last year. So if anything, receiving in the Amazon fulfillment centers is going to be a challenge, to say the least. And if your inventory is not there by these deadlines, you want to be very cautious so that you have whatever other strategies you've planned, you're executing on that without further delay. So I just wanted to add a few points there before turning it back to you all on the IPI and how is it computed, what factors influence it. Ned and Evan, if you want to break this down for our audience, please.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're seeing now is a screenshot from the IPI dash, and it portrays the various factors that are influencing the IPI, kind of where you sit in relation to each factor. And quite frankly, I think this is something that sellers should be keeping an eye on, weekly, if not daily, because things do change quickly. And Amazon does provide you, you'll see a little bit of this in the next slide, some recommendations about how to address these different pieces. If, let's say, you move into the yellow and red zones and you're at risk of starting to negatively impact that IPI. So let's take a look at the next slide. All right, as far as sell-through goes, the sell-through rate is the variable, anecdotally from what we've seen, that impacts IPI score the most. So the site indicates you should have less than 2 weeks of inventory in FBA for those really strong, fast-moving SKUs. Each SKU is going to have a different sourcing profile, so need to be wary of sending in too much inventory unless you have the sell-through to support strong IPI. And this has been mentioned already a couple times, so thinking about landing containers at a trusted 3PL versus sending everything in all at once unless you're certain that it won't negatively impact your IPI factors. So these are all things that at Kaspien that we're looking at on a weekly basis, if not daily, and actioning accordingly to ensure that we're not negatively impacting our overall score. So let's move on to
one question that I have here is, more frequent inbounds, of course, it's satisfying Amazon FBA. How does that change your profitability equation? Sending more smaller packages as opposed to sending a large amount of inventory to Amazon, it's got to have some impact on profitability and margins. If you want to cover that along with when you cover the next one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great question and something that, has been a balancing act for the team through all these changes. From an economies of scale perspective, you lose those economies of scale as you are sending in more frequent inbounds and that are smaller. It's a lot more cost effective to maximize your utilization on a 40-foot container as opposed to shipping in, small LTL shipments or small parcel shipments. You're also talking about, fulfilling in and processing one order versus, let's say, 10 if you're breaking it up into smaller chunks. So from a resource perspective, it's going to take teams longer to process, multiple shipments as opposed to one large one just based on those splits. So I will say these are things to keep an eye on and make sure you're understanding as you're making changes like that, how that impacts, let's say, the shipping per unit or, how efficient your teams are in processing these orders. So those are the two pieces that we're looking at the most closely on our end. Evan, from your perspective, any way that you look at that differently from the dropship side of things?
Not necessarily from the dropship side of things, but just a note on the case pack piece. Really, one of the big potential issues that can run up with the case packs coming in is higher amounts of product being damaged. So definitely encourage anyone who is running their own Seller Central accounts to utilize that Amazon shipping. Because that does put liability back on Amazon for products that are broken in transit and allows you to get reimbursements. As long as you catch Amazon in the act. So definitely want to make sure that if you are in the position where you're shipping in those cases, that you're using that system that helps reduce some of the risk of getting product broken in transit.
Absolutely, love passing that liability on.
That's a great point, Evan. And I know you all have a tool, because the more frequently you have to deal with FBA, there's greater chances of the numbers not lining up, reconciliation, and other damages that you might be eligible for reimbursements. And I know you all have a tool that you will probably talk about later in the presentation on how sellers can recover some of those reimbursements that may be due to them, and staying on top of many more inbounds is certainly puts a stress on their operations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can get into that a little bit more, but we do have a tool called Channel Auditor that can help sellers, get back some of the money owed through the reconciliation process. With FBA, there's a lot of fees that you can get nickeled and dimed on over time. So you want to make sure you're keeping as much money in your pockets as possible, and that's a valuable tool that can help with that.
Sure. Moving on back to the IPI, what tools and tips and recommendations do you have, Ned, on how sellers can maximize their FBA limits as they have it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is looks like a screenshot also from the IPI dash. And if we want to move on to the next slide, I'd go into some more information regarding these actionable tips. So as far as improving your 90-day sell-through from a content optimization perspective, you definitely want to be managing your reviews, your A+ content, have a strong search engine optimization team that can assist with that. I think there are some of these tips that are more easily or quickly actionable than others. They have different cost implications. So for instance, improving listings through content optimization and driving visibility through ad spend on the left-hand side there. Those are things that you can do pretty easily and have a quick impact with. You do need to understand that through the ad spend, there is cost implication to that, but you can get a lot of bang for your buck there. Same thing with improving listings, and that's more of just from a resource perspective, understanding what kind of resources you need to manage those changes within your catalog. But winning the buy box through right pricing, it's important to have a team that's constantly monitoring your pricing if you have a large catalog, and making changes to ensure that you're maximizing your average selling price. And then this one is kind of goes without saying based on what we're talking about today, but add fast moving SKUs to boost your overall sell through. I'd say these ones on the left are just a little bit quicker as far as actioning. The ones on the right hand side can definitely have a large impact, but things like reducing excess inventory through removals and disposals, Amazon is not currently prioritizing those things too heavily. So while if they happen quickly, they could have an immediate and very large impact, you could see removals and disposals take months to actually take place. All the while, that inventory that you're trying to remove or dispose of is still impacting your utilization and your overall IPI score. Not only that, there is a cost that comes with that. So, improving listings through content optimization, your ad spend, running deals through coupons and promotions, those are going to be very important. And if you're a seller that doesn't have the ability to do that in-house, it's very important to partner with a company such as Kaspien that can help support you from a marketing perspective, and advise on what the best strategy is there to drive the sell-through that you need. You also have the option to fix listing, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of skipping around here, but you also have the opportunity to fix listings as per Amazon suggestions, just like is mentioned in the slide there. And these are also things that, having an inventory management team is really helpful in. So that is something that we offer, through the Kaspien model, and something we're very focused on for our brands.
Thank you, Ned. One other strategy that I know when we were prepping for the webinar, you shared that if you cannot remove the inventory fast enough, you may be also able to use multi-channel fulfillment just to exhaust the inventory, even though it is costlier. It is more expensive to do multi-channel fulfillment through Amazon, but it's certainly one way of exhausting inventory.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, you want to chime in here regarding how you would be thinking about that split between FBA and multi-channel?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ways that you could see this manifest is, if you're running a brand with a direct website and you're filling those orders through your warehouse, but you're also running into IPI issues at the same time, you can run the numbers and see if you're willing to take a small margin hit in fulfilling your direct website sales through MCF instead of through your own warehouse or through a 3PL's sales, in order to kind of boost up that IPI score, because we know those MCF listings do, or MCF orders do, impact sell-through.
Thank you, Evan. And again, just to quick housekeeping that you can do is certainly address those stranded inventory, because that's hurting your numbers, hurting those metrics, and that's something that is well within your control that you can do very easily. If you don't have the resources in-house, certainly reach out to folks like Kaspien who can help. But we know that, in spite of doing all of these things, all the best practices, for a lot of folks, it's probably still not going to be enough. And sellers need to plan around that. And in order to plan, we've got a couple of recommendations. None of these should come as a surprise to anyone. And it's been talked about quite heavily in the circles, that have a FBM plan, which is fulfilled by merchant. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that all your top sellers that are at risk of replenishment or restocking limits, you may want to create FBM listings for them, have them ready to go. In fact, Amazon does allow you to have one FBA and one FBM listing each for each of the ASINs. So you don't want to wait till the last minute, because if the listing doesn't get approved or what have you, and even find opportunities to keep that listing vibrant and active, because when you need it, it's already ready to go. And as I said earlier, you can have, officially speaking, you can have one listing each, and you want to be ready to go when you need it. Certainly, you can do fulfilled by merchant either using your own warehouse if you have, or you can use a 3PL. The second option is seller fulfilled prime, which is basically you get the prime badge on your listing, which is very, very valuable. As you know, a large portion, or more than 50% of Amazon consumers are Prime members, and by default, they will see the Prime offers above non-Prime offers. So if your account has been approved for Seller Fulfilled Prime, you are in a very envious position, because that program has been unavailable for any new sellers. So if you have that Seller Fulfilled Prime selling status and privilege, you certainly want to take advantage of that. But the metrics, the fulfillment metrics for Seller Fulfilled Prime is extremely demanding, because you're targeting the affluent Amazon consumer who wants their product in 1 or 2 days. And Seller Fulfilled Prime requires you to fulfill and deliver your items in 1 and 2 day. 2 day used to be the norm about a year ago when Amazon made some massive changes. And now you need to deliver products, at least 20% of the products in 1 day and the remaining in 2 days. So very, very demanding metrics. It requires a network of warehouses, at least 3 to 4 strategic locations. That means those are strategic, well-placed within the US across the population centers. Sometimes it may require more. And therefore, generally speaking, the traditional 3PLs cannot handle that sort of demanding fulfillment metrics, combined with the geographical presence that one needs to have, plus the technology that is needed, because you have a cutoff time for Seller Fulfilled Prime is 2 p.m. local time. So if you have a warehouse that you're shipping out of, say on the West Coast, you'd have to support 2 p.m. West Coast time. You don't have a choice. You cannot say, I will do 10 a.m. And it also requires a 6-day fulfillment. That means you have to ship at least one of the weekends, Saturday or Sunday. So generally speaking, we find that sellers, especially Amazon sellers that are targeting those customers, will benefit better if they had no limitations on physical locations on the warehouse. So if you work with a network, be it Cahoot or somebody else, you have far greater choices, and you're not restricted to one location, and still able to target a large number of Amazon customers. Even if you don't have Prime, you can offer premium shipping, and you can offer that using affordable ground delivery. And it gives the impression to the customer that the product will still get there fast, and that will help you with the conversion. It helps you with the buy box. So those are the two strategies from a fulfillment perspective: either do it yourself, standard, or if you have Seller Fulfilled Prime, you definitely want to dust that off and take advantage of it while you can. This holiday season is going to be the largest on record. So there's an incredible opportunity for the folks who plan and are prepared with backup options, because there will be challenges and you want to be ahead of that. And then there are a couple of other ways you can continue selling regardless of what happens to your Amazon stock limits. And they are resellers and dropship. I'll let Evan and Ned chime in on these 2 points. Back to you guys.
Thank you. And just one quick clarification on Seller Fulfilled Prime, just so that make sure everyone's on the same page there. For Seller Fulfilled Prime, it is a requirement for over 20% of your page views to be viewed as potentially 1-day Seller Fulfilled Prime. And so it's just it's a weird little nuance there. But what that means is that the more locations where you're storing inventory that's Seller Fulfilled Prime eligible, the easier it is to get that 1-day SFP target without hitting any kind of issues with shipping a zone 7 or a zone 8 air shipment. And so the other piece there with Seller Fulfilled Prime is, if you have coverage for warehouses that are all within 400 miles of the customer, you're going to see a really huge reduction in shipping cost, because you'll be able to do most of those shipments ground. In Seller Fulfilled Prime, outside of products with specific margin profiles, can be really troublesome if you're fulfilling only out of 1 location or 2 locations, because suddenly you get a shipment to Florida or to Maine, and then you've got to have another dozen orders to cover that loss of margin.
Thank you, Evan. And the metrics are very, very demanding. So if you don't meet those metrics, those selling privileges will be taken away very quickly. And Amazon is, of course, very unforgiving. So generally speaking, sellers should be looking at networks that have many locations throughout the country, not just limited to 1 or 2 locations. So thank you for that clarification. And there are some other ways you can continue selling by authorizing resellers and dropship. Evan and Ned, you want to touch briefly on that? We are towards the final 15 minutes of our presentation now.
All good from my end. Evan, anything on the dropship side of thing there?
No, pretty straightforward there. That's us working with you to make sure your product can go out of the warehouse in the right time.
Perfect. And when we're talking about Kaspien, formerly known as Details, we rebranded to Kaspien in 2020. We've morphed and changed our model a little bit over time into what we are today, which is a dynamic marketplace growth enabled platform. We're harnessing data and proprietary technology and software to help brands execute on whatever their marketplace strategy and goals are. So whatever your model looks like, whatever marketplace goals you have for e-commerce, we're here to support them through one of the models you see here. So, if you're interested in how we can help, feel free to reach out to us on our forum through Kaspien.com. These are the different models associated. Sorry, I skipped a little bit there. Yeah, so these are the different models that we offer here. I won't go through reading each of these individually, but you get the idea. We have kind of an a la carte offering here to satisfy whatever your needs are.
So thank you. Just a quick intro into Cahoot. Cahoot is a order fulfillment network. We specialize in helping sellers sell on Amazon and any other channel they sell, and especially Seller Fulfilled Prime. Cahoot network has one of the highest fulfillment standards in the industry. So if you're looking to have a redundant fulfillment strategy in place, and you'd like to be up and running very quickly because we have the technology, the deep integration with Amazon, 5-star rated app, please reach out to us. We'd love to chat with you and help you and prepare and plan well ahead of the holiday season. So that's a little bit about Cahoot. And just to recap, and please keep the questions coming. I know we'll have some amount of time left over, so please put those questions in. Just as a final wrap up and the takeaways, sellers must recognize the FBA limits and impact. There's not going to be enough space for all the merchants. There will be a decline in limits, especially oversized, and you will see that changing over the next several months and weeks. So it's important to plan around that. And the second piece is to maximize your current and allotted limits, keeping a very close eye and managing it proactively using the tips we've shared earlier, and then implementing non-FBA fulfillment options to have as a backup, as a alternate strategy that is fully tested, ready to go, and also operationally functional and fully tested. So there are a couple of options: FBM, Seller Fulfilled Prime, outsourcing, resellers, and dropship. Those are some of the ways you can continue selling, which in my opinion is the most important task, regardless of what happens with the FBA replenishment, restock, or what have you. You just don't want to stop selling. I'm going to turn it back to you, Mike, for Q&A.
Great. Thanks, guys. And Manish, there's a poll there. If you can launch that. Just want to, for those that have visited the webinar here may have some questions specifically for Kaspien or Cahoot. Just let us know if you'd like some additional information. So we'll leave that up for just a minute. And we do have some great questions that have come in. So I'll get started with those. I think Katie's going to help me out from the Kaspien side. So the first question that we've got here is, and this is for Manish, this is for you. What percentage of state coverage does Cahoot offer 1-day and 2-day shipping? So I think they're asking about sort of geographic coverage or population coverage.
Yeah, so Cahoot has nationwide coverage depending on your inventory and sell-through. Cahoot would then choose the right strategic locations for your inventory. But as far as our network is concerned, we have 99% plus 2-day coverage in the continental US and closer to 80–90% for 1-day coverage, which far exceed the SFP metrics.
Great. All right. Thanks, Manish. Katie, any questions from your side there? If not, I've got some more here. All right. I've got another one here for you, Manish. So somewhat similar to the last one in terms of how many warehouse locations and what sort of discounted partial shipping might be available. So maybe the difference in zones, things like that.
I'm sorry, Mike, could you please repeat that question?
So yeah, so a little bit similar to the last question in terms of how many locations that Kahoot has, and what impact that can have on their shipping costs.
Oh, the impact on shipping costs can be massive, because the cost to ship a zone 8 can be more than double a zone 2. Zone 2 is basically, think about 200, less than 400 miles would be a zone 2, zone 3, compared to, say, New York to California, close to 3,000 miles, or so would be. There are two factors. The cost is generally, could be as high as double, plus the transit time is also double. So it would take, 4 to 7 days for a ground package, a parcel to go from New York to California, and cost twice as much. So you save on both sides, the time as well as cost. So each seller may have their own negotiated rates. If you're a large seller, you have your own rates with FedEx and UPS, and then Kahoot can help as well. So please reach out to us and we can perform a accurate analysis for you.
Great. All right, and I see one here for Caspian, question about international programs for dropship.
Yeah, thanks. There's a couple different ways that this could break out for international. So for Caspian, we currently do our dropship and intend to do most of our dropship domestic to domestic. So we're doing that in the US. We do have hopes and dreams regarding doing that, like in spots like Canada and the UK, but again, that would be all inside of the same country. As far as export dropship goes, it's not something we currently do. We have vetted out some folks before for doing some stuff, but usually that's going from US to another country like the UAE. And then from the import side, we're terrified of importing dropship direct, and are willing to figure it out. But it's not a process that we necessarily have a depth of expertise in yet.
Great. All right, thanks. And we've got a couple of questions around FBM here. One question here, Manish, is a customer is doing some FBA, but they also do some FBM, and they're wondering if Kahoot would need to do all of the FBM, or they can still continue to do some of their own fulfillment. Basically, how would that work with a customer that does some of their own fulfillment but wants some help?
That's a great question. Kahoot has a software in addition to our fulfillment network and service, and the software is extremely flexible and what we call all-inclusive or inclusive fulfillment, where the merchant warehouse can be a part of the node on the network, and merchant can fulfill their orders that is closer to them, and then Kahoot can help fulfill orders that are further away. So in short, we support that model. Please reach out to us and we can talk more specifics.
Great. And this may be one for Ned or whoever can take it. This talks about the seasonal inventory. So my inventory is seasonal to Q4. Thus, my IPI will not be high enough based on the previous 90 days, currently around 550. But the sell-through rate was great during the last holidays. Is there anything, what strategy should they employ to try to, sell more with the impact of their last 90 days of IPI?
Yeah, this is a great question and very well timed. So this is something that, there are sellers on the platform that operate mostly off of holiday sales or have seasonal product lines. And currently, Amazon is pretty agnostic to the seasonality as far as how the restock limits and the IPI is structured. So I do know, in talking with our account managers and, looking at seller forums, that there have been a lot of sellers giving feedback to Amazon and trying to understand if Amazon is going to change anything to address this seasonal issue. To this point, I haven't heard anything concrete from Amazon or in my research otherwise. So I think this just further points to the need to diversify and make sure that you have a 3PL or a trusted provider that can help you execute on the goals, regardless of what Amazon is doing to address these types of issues.
Great. All right, another question about IPI. Let's see, my IPI is now 442. If I reach 450 next week, will my restock limit be removed immediately, or will that take some time?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question,
So
Mike?
it sounds like they're asking about the change between their IPI and when their restock limits, if there's a difference in timing of their IPI score versus their actual change in restock limits.
Oh, got it. So I believe these things are changing on like a weekly basis. From anecdotally from what we've seen, it's kind of a week over week change. So if it's 442 now, less than ideal, but it is, changed to 450 next week. You should see those changes hit your restock limits and your IPI pretty quickly. Like I said, about a week or so. But that's what we've been seeing on our end. So as long as you're making the necessary changes to, positively impact that score, you should also be able to reap those benefits fairly quickly.
Great. All right. Thanks, Ed.
To clarify on that question,
go
they're
ahead.
asking, would their restock limit be removed? And I think the answer is no, but you'd see an improvement. Is that correct?
Yes. Thanks for clarifying, Evan. That's correct from my understanding.
Great. All right, and here's a couple of questions are kind of related, so I'm going to combine these together for Manish. We've got a customer here that is selling on Amazon, but they also have a Shopify site. I'm wondering if Kahoot can sort of help with both channels. And then there's another question here about a customer selling on Amazon, but is looking to expand into Walmart and wondering about the same sort of question.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, Kahoot is channel agnostic. Although Kahoot has one of the highest fulfillment standards, because we have to, if you're going to support Seller Fulfill Prime, but we offer the same level of service for all channels. We have native integration with all the popular marketplaces and e-commerce platforms like Shopify, BigCommerce. You've got Amazon, Walmart, eBay, and a few others. And we also integrate with all the major listing solution providers like Channel Advisor and Geek Seller and Zentel and so on. So essentially, we have an integration for you directly or indirectly. And also then we have our Kahoot API. But if you're using and selling on most popular channels, it is super duper simple. Our integration will bring the orders in, route it to the right fulfillment location, print the cheapest label, and send the tracking information back to the channel. So it is very seamless and easy for the seller.
Great. And it looks like there may be one more question. We're kind of coming up on time. Katie, was there another question from your side that?
Yeah, there was. So for Ned or Evan, the question is there a good solution for having inventory returned from FBA Canada to the US? I know there's been a lot of issues up in Canada, so good question. Ned or Evan, can you take that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Katie. Another very well-timed question. It's not the easiest to remove, like you can't remove directly from FBA Canada across border. The removal address has to be in Canada. So the solution that we've identified is standing up a 3PL in Canada, remove the inventory to Canada, and then you would need to move that across the border back to the US. Does introduce some additional cost and logistics there, as well as some import-export implications. But as long as you understand the profiles of those, it does give you an opportunity to get the goods back to the US if that's what you're looking to do. So, I imagine you could utilize other 3PLs like Kahoot potentially to do that. Manish, can you speak a little bit about what your network looks like internationally?
Great. Thank you, Evan. In 2021, we are focused in North America or the US primarily. So we currently we have not lit up any locations in Canada yet, but we'll certainly be sure to announce some sometime next year. But right now, Cahoot can only take in inventory in the US.
Okay, great. I think we're coming up on time. Any final thoughts to share with the audience there, Manish or Evan or Ned?
Just one other point. I mean, I know this webinar was primarily about Amazon, but let's not forget there are many other channels, many other marketplaces. In fact, Walmart is growing even faster than Amazon. So keep an eye out on those other channels. So if you are not able to maximize your efforts on Amazon, don't discount those other channels. Over to you, Evan and Ned.
Thanks, Manish. Nothing additional at this time. We just appreciate the opportunity to join as co-host here. It's been a great discussion.
Great. All right. Well, I think we will call that a wrap and want to thank everybody for attending today. And we'll be sure to get the recording out to you as soon as we can. So thanks again for attending. Hope you got some good value out of it. So long now.
Thank you, everyone.